Well, hello once again, Manna University. I'm Jeff Christensen, and welcome to part 3 of our look at the sufficiency and supremacy of God for Manna U Moments. I grew up in an old school type of church environment. It was very traditional liturgy, and the pastor wore robes, and they had people who lit candles on the altar at the beginning of service, and we only sang hymns. It's that kind of traditional. And I remember when I was in high school and I saw for the very first time a team from another church who had come to our church that morning, and they were doing contemporary worship music. A bit more like the kind of music that we do at Manna Church and in other churches that are associated with our movement. Now, they weren't doing it that well, but that's the kind of music they were doing. Honestly, at that time, it was so unfamiliar, and I remember being completely put off by what was happening. I remember thinking, this is garbage. There's no way this honors God. And I was actually mad about it. This memory just stands out to me. The fact is, at that point, I don't know, maybe I was reacting a little bit to some of the poor musicianship that was taking place, but I think I was reacting actually to the form of what was being delivered. My tradition was preventing me from seeing the beauty in something new. In his letter to the Ephesians, Paul has some things to say about traditions and how they have created problems for the people of God. So today we're talking about God's supremacy over our traditions. Because Paul isn't addressing the issue of church music or whether or not pastors should wear robes or we should light candles. It has nothing to do with that. He's actually addressing Jewish law and the division that has arisen in the churches over its practice. But I want you to see how he phrases this in Ephesians 2:14 through 15. He says, "For he himself is our peace," this is Jesus, "who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace." So with the death and the resurrection of Jesus, the law had been fulfilled on behalf of God's people. There were a number of law-observant or Torah-observant Jewish Christians who looked down on the Gentile Christians for not practicing Jewish law. The law was given in the Old Testament, you all know that, and it was a good thing. And it's still a good thing. The 10 Commandments are still relevant to our lives today. We need to still pursue holy living and moral excellence like we see God outlining in the Old Testament. But what Paul was saying here is that the law has now been fulfilled for God's people by Jesus. Observing the law was no longer how God's covenant with his people was regulated. That was the difference. It was the law was 613 commandments. Who can do all of that? So in that sense, it had become a tradition that needed to be let go of. The truth is that Jesus is exalted above every tradition. He is supreme. So hear me on this. The gospel and the word of God never change, but our methods, our traditions, those things will never be permanent. If we let ourselves think that our way is the only way, then we get arrogant. We end up divided from brothers and sisters in the faith. The church traditions I grew up with were created to be something good, and they're still good, but they don't have exclusive claim. No tradition of man does. So we can embrace traditions, we can enjoy them, celebrate them, utilize them, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment that we think our traditions or our methods of how we do what we do for God, the moment we think that that's the only way, we start to miss the power of the gospel, the one truth that can bring together people from many different traditions. Jesus is exalted above every tradition, and Jesus alone can bring all of us together. Good to be with you today, Manna University. Come back next week for the fourth and final part of our look at the sufficiency and supremacy of God for Manna U Moments.